Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Ciaruteun Ghosh, Professor, Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Calcutta. The subject is Indian culture and the paper is Indian Epigraphy. Today I am going to discuss with you the inscriptions of Purnavarman from Western Java. You can see this map of Western Java, and from this map you can locate the places called Bogor, where we have found inscriptions of this ruler called Purnavarman, and there are other places also like Bekashi, where also Purnavarman's inscription has been discussed. We will discuss 4 inscriptions of Purnavarman in this module. Now, when we talk of interactions between India and Southeast Asia, we find that archaeological discoveries in Southeast Asia since the later part of the 19th century created a more acute consciousness about the cultural links between India and Southeast Asia. We have to think that not the entire part of India was involved in a kind of interaction, but it was only mostly the eastern seaboard which was having a kind of interaction with regions of Southeast Asia. Among the different aspects of cultural linkages, Sanskrit epigraphy from Southeast Asia demonstrates distinctive interactions both in terms of content, script and language. In fact, in regions of Southeast Asia like Cambodia, like Champa, which is present in Vietnam, Java, many inscriptions have been found which are written in Sanskrit. There are also inscriptions written in Tamil, so which shows that there were constant interaction between people from India to regions of Southeast Asia. Regarding the inscriptions, we find that inscriptions in the Indo-Aryan languages from Southeast Asia are large in number. Regarding form and content, they are very similar to those of the Indian subcontinent. The script has been termed as Indic. However, we have a presence of local elements which was quite strong in some cases. In some cases, we have bilingual inscriptions where we have Sanskrit inscriptions and the local language inscription, or Tamil inscriptions and the local language inscriptions. The question is that from which part of India the influence actually percolated, and this is a major issue, and in this regard the role of southern or eastern part of the Indian subcontinent is very important. So Brahmi script, which was used in eastern India, in southern India, we find them present in the inscriptions of Southeast Asia. The oldest epigraphic document found in Java are the 4 rock inscriptions of this ruler called Purnavarman. So we are concentrating now for this module on Western Java, where we have these inscriptions of this ruler. So there are 4 inscriptions as I mentioned. So first one is the Ciaruteun inscription, the second one is the Jambu rock inscription, the third one is the Kebon Kopi rock inscription, and the fourth one is the Tugu rock inscription. They form a cluster of inscriptions issued by one particular ruler who was actually ruling from the 4th century to the 5th century, and they belong to the time period of middle of the 5th century CE. Let us first start with the Ciaruteun inscription. The location of this inscription is actually a rock and it is inscribed, it's in the midst of a mass of boulders in the bed of the Ciaruteun river near the spot where it joins the sea Sadane. These are the rivers, and the site is bounded by 3 rivers, namely on the south Ciaruteun river, on the west Ciaruteun river, on the north Ciaruteun river estuary and Cisadane river. Presently, this is located in the Bandung Museum. The language, as I mentioned, was Sanskrit, and it consists of 4 short lines, each line being a pada of a stanza composed in the Anushtuv meter. And the script used is Pallava Grantha. We will find that in all these 4 inscriptions, the script is Pallava script, which shows that the influence in these inscriptions was mainly from southern India. This inscription was first brought to the notice by Reverend Brumund in 1868, but a very clear transcript was published by Dr. Cohen Stewart in 1875. It was later edited by H. Kern and P. H. Vogel. The inscription talks of King Purnavarman. He was the most famous king of the Tarumanagara kingdom. This kingdom was named Tarumanagara is found in the inscription itself. It is said that he was the third king of Taruma and ruled from 395 to 434 CE, that is in the middle of the 5th century. He had a long reign, as his other inscription called the Tugu inscription was inscribed in his 22nd year. His capital was called Taruma, which was also known in the name of the Tarum river. The content, you can see the boulder where this inscription is being inscribed, and we have on one side the inscription, and on the other side we have some spiders marks and a very decorated kind of a calligraphed kind of script. The inscription says, "Of the valiant lord of earth, the illustrious Purnavarman, who is the ruler of the town of Taruma, is this the pair of footprints like unto Vishnu's." So we have here the footprints which shows that they were Vishnu's footprint as written in the inscription. This is another view of the inscription, and you can clearly see the inscription, which is the Pallava Grantha script with this elongated hook like structure, and you have the footprints also. Now let us look at the historical importance of this inscription. What is noteworthy is that the information that we receive from this inscription is very scanty, and therefore there are many questions unanswered. For example, what is the lineage of Purnavarman? We have no reference to this in the inscription. This could point to the fact that Purnavarman did not have any lofty parentage to boast of. And this was often the case where the kings who did not have a pedigree, they did not mention the name of the ancestors. Scholars thought that the name Purnavarman might be the name of an immigrant, but it might not be so, because the name does not suggest that he was an immigrant. He could be an Indian who was residing there and using an Indian name. Vogel suggested that he could have come from India, or there is a possibility that he was a local prince who was influenced by Indian religion and culture, and perhaps Indian mode of kingship. Here the 4 lines talks about the fact that Purnavarman could be compared to the king with Vishnu, because we have footprints said to be Purnavarman on the stone, and it is said that the footprints of Vishnu. The fact that Purnavarman is styled Vikranta and his footprints are likened to Vishnu alludes to the Trivikrama incarnation of that deity. In India, there was a tradition of having footprints of Vishnu and Shiva. So we have this tradition, and even Buddha, and this tradition was perhaps carried over to the regions of Southeast Asia, where also we notice a lot of footprints. Purnavarman perhaps was a very renowned ruler, and so it was necessary to record in stone in certain places which had been hallowed by his presence. So these stone inscriptions are located not very far away from each other, but it formed a cluster. The inscription is silent about any great activity of the ruler, particularly in this area. So this is also one factor where we do not have any kind of information, but this much we know, that he was a very famous ruler, and the next inscription will show that he was also a very famous warrior. Tarumanagara was probably located near Bogor in Western Java. Our next inscription is the Jambu rock inscription of Purnavarman also. This inscription was discovered in 1854, and the first serious attempt to read this inscription, to decipher this inscription, was by H. Kern in 1875. It was found in the same district of Ciaruteun, which I have referred that these were a part of a big cluster of inscriptions, and here it is only of 2 lines. But these 2 lines are composed in Vidya-mitra. The language is of course Sanskrit, and the script is the same as with Ciaruteun. So they were using the Pallava script, which suggests the close linkage. The content of the inscription is: illustrious, the munificent and true to his duty, was the unequalled lord of men, the illustrious Purnavarman by name. And it's broken in some parts, who once ruled at Taruma and whose famous armor was impenetrable by the darts of a multitude of foes. His is the pair of footprints which was ever dexterous in destroying hostile towns, is salutary to devoted princes, but a thorn in the side of his enemies. Thus, this whole inscription suggests that Purnavarman was regarded as a supreme ruler. Now, if we look at the format of the inscription, it shows that it was more like a prashasti which we have in India. But in the context of India, the prashastis were generally much longer and written much in ornate Sanskrit or Prakrit. But here it is a shorter inscription, but definitely praising the ruler, the warlike activities of the ruler. We also know about the political situation, which suggests that there were many principalities around his kingdom and Purnavarman remained victorious, because we have this example where it is said that in the inscription that his darts would defeat a lot of foes. This stone monument is considered to be erected after the death of Purnavarman, and it suggests that the king was also excellent as a warrior. Interestingly, here too a pair of footprints was carved, but the part of the rock is broken. Thus we find that footprints formed an important part of these inscriptions, which were inscribed in boulders, where we do not have the name of the scribe or the composer. These are short inscriptions, but very important for understanding the interaction between India and Southeast Asia. The third inscription is the Kebon Kopi rock inscription. This is also near Ciaruteun. It is cut on a large sized rock of irregular shape, which is found on the plateau enclosed between two rivers, Ciaruteun and Ciaruteun. The first attempt at decipherment of this inscription was again made by H. Kern in 1885. But due to the bad preservation of the stone, there is uncertainty regarding the reading of the inscription. The language is of course Sanskrit, and it is in Anushtubh meter, but it consists only of one single stanza. The script is again Pallava. You can have a look at the boulders and you can see some marks. These were actually referred to in the inscription as elephant foot. So till now the two inscriptions talked about the feet of Purnavarman himself, and now we are being shown the elephant feet, which was also preserved and inscribed. The content of the inscription is: Airavata, like elephant of the lord of Taruma, who is great in, and then it is broken, it cannot be read, and then we find the term and victory. Now in the rock there are two, as I mentioned just now, that there are two round depressions carved above and below the inscription, and it shows the outline of an elephant's footprint. In view of the damaged scenario of the inscription, we can only conjecture or only think that the elephant of the Indra of Taruma, that is Purnavarman, can be compared with the elephant of Indra. Thus here is an attempt to show that Purnavarman was also the king of kings like the Indra, and he possessed an elephant who was like Indra's elephant Airavata. That Purnavarman is associated with victory is reflected here. Thus, this inscription in one line or two lines, it is broken, but shows the grandeur of the ruler and how he is compared with the lord of Indian gods, the Indra. The fourth and one of the most important inscription is the Tugu rock inscription. This inscription is a little different from the others because here we do not have the footprints neither of the ruler nor of an elephant, and was found in the village of Tugu near the sea coast to the east of Tanjung Priok, which is near Batavia, the port of Batavia. The inscription is now housed in the Batavia Museum. This inscription was also edited for the first time by H. Karn in 1885. The shape of the rock is very interesting. It is conical in shape, and originally it was buried for a long time. Half only was exposed. Later on, when the entire rock was exposed, it showed that there were inscriptions, which was very important for understanding the irrigation program of the ruler. The language is Sanskrit, but it is not a very good Sanskrit like the other inscriptions. It contains 5 stanzas in the Anushtup meter. The script again is Pallava. You can see the conical shape of the inscription and how the script has been beautifully carved. So the carving of these inscriptions are something to be taken note of. Now about the content. Here, as I mentioned, that the content was different from the contents of the inscriptions we have studied so far. It says that formerly the Chandrabhaga, that is the river Chandrabhaga, dug by the great King of Kings, the strong-armed Guru, after having reached the famous town, flowed into the ocean. The beautiful Gomati, with clear water, dug within 21 days, beginning from the 8th day of the dark fortnight of the month of Falguna to the 13th day of the dark fortnight of the month of Chaitra, in the 22nd year of the prosperous reign of the illustrious Purnavarman, glorious, virtuous and powerful, as also most excellent among kings, measuring in 6,122 dhanush long, that is bows. Dhanu is the measurement. It had torn asunder the camping ground of grandfather and royal sage, is now flowing after a great gift of 1,000 cows to the Brahmanas. So you can see that the whole purport of this inscription was different. It talks about the restoration and the construction of a canal, which was necessary for irrigation or for purpose. The canal is designated by the names of 2 well-known rivers of North India. One is Chandrabhaga and Gomati. But here I would like to say that Chandrabhaga, Gomati, these are very common names of Indian rivers. So we have one Chandrabhaga, which is the famous Chenab in the Punjab, but it is quite unlikely that the Punjab Chandrabhaga was named in this part of Southeast Asia. There are Chandrabhaga rivers in Madhya Desha, like in Madhya Pradesh also, and even in South India. So it could be that this Chandrabhaga, the name of this Chandrabhaga was taken from any river called Chandrabhaga from southern India. The system adopted for reckoning the dates of the month is Amanto, which points to a South Indian practice. That a canal of about 7 miles long could be excavated in 21 days seems to be incredible. Though the inscription mentions that the entire stretch was completed within 21 days, it sometimes there is some exaggeration in inscriptions, and it might be that it is not 21 days and it took more than that period. Interestingly, it refers to a royal gift of 1,000 cows to the Brahmanas. And it says that with the royal gift of 1,000 cows, there was a flow, perhaps flow of the river. Perhaps these 1,000 cows were given as a part of a sacrifice, which is not mentioned in the inscription. And regarding the measuring term called dhanush, we find that in the Arthashastra, the word dhanush was used. So this bow measure is also very common in India. Even if we look at the Lagman edicts of Ashoka, which is written in Aramaic, we find that there also the bow measurement is being used. Therefore, it appears that the dhanu measurement, the bow measurement, was borrowed from the Indian subcontinent to Southeast Asia, and so here Purnavarman was using that measurement for describing the length of the canal. This inscription is also very important to us. Why? Because it's a classic example of water management as early as 5th century CE. A similar example of water management could be given from the inscriptions that we find in India. For example, the Junagadh rock inscription of Rudradaman and Skandagupta, which talks about an irrigation program in the river, in the Girnar, in the western part of Indian subcontinent, in Gujarat region, where actually a lake was being constructed called Lake Sudarshana, and where the king had a program of irrigation, and in one inscription we find that a bridge was created and which was repaired by the king. In this case, we have that the digging project was to straighten and widen the river in order to avoid flooding in the wet season and as an irrigation project during the dry season. Therefore, it is very important to note that a supralocal irrigation project was initiated by the ruler called Purnavarman, who was appreciated as a very important ruler, a great warrior in these inscriptions. On the inscription, there is an image of a staff crowned with Trishula, straight to mark the separation between the beginning and the end of each sentence. Now, when we take these 4 inscriptions together, we find that the inscriptions acquaint us with a kingdom in West Java which reflects knowledge of Indian culture. And I should mention here that Indian interaction in West Java is comparatively lesser, because if you look at the eastern part of the Java, we find that in case of art and in central Java, we have more examples of artistic interactions, we have more examples of temples which have Indian influence. But in case of West Java, it is mainly these inscriptions which suggest that there was a strong kind of interaction which should not be thought of as Indianization, but it was a kind of a process called adoption and adaptation. Close interaction with the northern part of Coromandel coast can be understood by the use of the Pallava Grantha script. No other script was used in these inscriptions. These inscriptions were very beautifully written, carved out in the rock, and here comes the role of the artisans. The scribes who inscribed this in hard substance like this rock were adept in doing so and showed much aesthetic sense, because in the Ciaruteun inscription we have one line which was, the calligraphy is very important and very beautifully written. Although the inscriptions in comparison to the Prashastis and charters of India are simple, yet most of them suggest the composer's knowledge of Sanskrit. Though these are short inscriptions, the composers used different kind of Sanskrit meters like the Anushtup, the Shrakdhara, and composed it in a very nice way. The only inscription was the Tugu inscription. This was perhaps because of the unusual nature of this text of the inscription, which Purnavarman's composer of this text could not comprehend and found it difficult to turn into a verse. Because if you look at the earlier inscriptions, these were mainly the praise of the ruler. They were talking about the might of the ruler, which is very common in Sanskrit poetry. But in this case, it was talking about building up of an irrigation project, digging of a canal, and perhaps the Brahmana who was composing this inscription, the Pandit of Purnavarman, was not adept enough to write it in proper Sanskrit prose or poetry. Purnavarman's footprint forms the subject matter of the 2 inscriptions, and those of the elephant, the 3rd and the 4th, records the digging of a canal. Besides, we have spider marks and a beautiful inscription in cursive which I mentioned just now in the Ciaruteun inscription. Thus, these inscriptions in totality form a very important part of epigraphic studies in Southeast Asia. Now, a few words about the paleography would be in order. We find that in these inscriptions, the heads of some letters look like a box, and these are distinctly marked by small squares, which is known as the box-headed script. And these box-headed script were introduced in the Vakataka inscriptions of Central Deccan and Western Deccan. After that, in the 5th century, a regional subtype was formed, and they were found in the inscriptions of the Kadambas. Now, this box-headed variety of Brahmi was carried forward to regions of Southeast Asia, and therefore in these inscriptions, if you notice minutely, you will find small square boxes which were acting as the serif, that is the matra. And not only in Java, also in regions of Vietnam. For example, the Champa inscriptions in some cases uses box-headed script. And normally the script that is used is, as I mentioned earlier, was the Pallava. So the early inscriptions were written in Sanskrit with the verses in classical Sanskrit meters. Therefore, when we study these inscriptions in totality, we find that interaction with India was very much there, and the codes of kingship, the protocols of the court, and the eulogy, the idea of eulogy, the idea of prashasti was being transferred to these regions. So there was this whole process of interaction which gave birth to a new kind of inscription, and this was the result of the adoption and adaptation of Sanskritic practices of Indian culture into regions of Southeast Asia. Thank you.